Chapter 1. The Ritual of Walls. The silence was a beautiful, suffocating lie. It felt like glass ready to shatter. A growl rose in her throat, a silent, feminine snarl of defiance against the shadow of the past. Cassandra Cass Hayes ran a gloved hand across the cold deadbolt. Her fingers traced the steel, verifying the click in place that her ears and eyes already confirmed. 3 deadbolts, 1 chain, and a heavy wooden bar required a specific, practiced pivot to lock. Safety wasn't a feeling in this life, it was a checklist. Control is safety. This iron rule governed her world now because the outside had proven itself unpredictable and violently cruel. She lived in rigid self-imposed exile, and every action was a defense against the chaotic past that had tried to break her. What followed was a sweep of the perimeter. Cass didn't look outside. Instead, she looked at the monitor displaying the feeds from 4 separate cameras hidden in the deep forest. Just trees. Always just trees. Just the way she needed it. Not only that, she'd painted the camera casings with camouflage because her old fear, Martin, the violent ex, knew her obsession with security. He knows where I run to, but he doesn't know where I hide. This cold comfort always lingered. Soon after, Cass settled at her large wooden easel in the studio area, the cabin's heart. Before her lay a sheet of expensive paper. Her current project was a hyper-detailed botanical illustration of the poisonous nightshade. She chose it because its rigid, predictable structure, the way the veins mapped out its fate, provided the only certainty she trusted. "Just focus on the line, Cass," she murmured, her voice swallowed by the thick walls. Just the line. Her hand, which had trembled earlier checking the locks, was rock steady now. Yet, as the pencil moved with meticulous precision, she mapped the exact angle of a leaf's serrated edge, and the process felt like weaving armor. She had been an art teacher once, full of life, full of color. But then, her art became a reflection of her fear, controlled, monochromatic, and focused on danger. In fact, the more afraid she was inside, the more perfectly measured her drawings became. Maybe the chaos is still in me, she thought, and I just draw it out. As the wind shifted outside, a heavy, sickening thud slammed against the wooden porch just outside her main window. It was too heavy to be a branch, too ragged to be a deer. The pencil snapped. Cass froze. Her world tilted. A cold weight settled instantly in her stomach, and her breath hitched. The silence of the cabin, her beautiful vacuum, had been instantly, brutally shattered. "No," she whispered, her voice trembled. "No, no, no." Without warning, a scratching sound followed, a desperate, dragging noise that clawed at the wood. It was frantic, like a wild thing trying to tear its way in. She backed away slowly from the easel. And all at once, everything changed. The thought of the ruined paper felt like a betrayal. Her meticulously crafted control, her 3 deadbolts, all threatened by a single sound. Which meant her deepest fear, that the world would eventually find her, was coming true. The air thickened. She gripped the frame of the studio door. In that moment, she didn't know if the sound was Martin, her old violence, or something entirely new, and she didn't know which scared her more. Truth be told, the primal desperation in the sound was terrifying because it wasn't human. What's worse, the old, horrible panic rose up. It was a dizzying rush, like the floor had suddenly dropped out from under her. Her vision narrowed to the porch door. She needed to know. She had to identify the threat. She had to regain control. Despite that, her feet were rooted to the spot. The paralysis of agoraphobia, that invisible chain, was tightening. I can't move. I can't look. I can't face it. As the silence stretched, broken only by her ragged breathing, she knew she had to force herself to the spy hole. Even so, she had to move, because staying frozen was exactly what Martin had taught her to do. He always liked me quiet. Soon after, Cass pressed herself flat against the inner wall of the mudroom, her whole body rigid. She fought the urge to scream. A beat later, she pressed her face against the cold metal casing of the spy hole. The next moment would decide if her 2 years of isolation had been worth anything at all. Chapter 2. The Uninvited Chaos. The world outside the spy hole was blurred and dark until Cass forced her eye to focus. Lying almost completely across the porch was a massive, black wolf. It was huge, matted with mud, and utterly still save for the shallow, ragged intake of breath. With every heartbeat, she saw the deep, vicious scars that crisscrossed his body. On the other hand, these looked less like natural hunting injuries and more like deliberate, intentional cuts. Wildness. Uncontrollable. The creature was the antithesis of her life, the embodiment of the chaos she was running from. She didn't know what scared her more, the predator in the wild or the predator in her memory. "Go away," she whispered, the sound a ragged wheeze, but the wolf didn't move. What followed was a rush of cold realization. The wolf was near death. She could see the blood seeping into the wood planks. Still, the primal fear raged. If you help it, you invite the uncontrollable inside. If you leave it, you're just like him. The internal war was swift and brutal. In that moment, her deep observational empathy, her artistic gift, latched onto the creature's suffering, ignoring its teeth. She saw not a beast, but a victim. She felt it, clear as day, the deep, penetrating agony emanating from the body. But then, the wolf's head lifted a single inch. Its heavy eyelids strained open, revealing intelligent, almost golden eyes that fixed directly on her position behind the spy hole. The moment their eyes locked, everything seemed to tilt. They weren't predatory. They were pleading. They held a look of profound, devastatingly human-like pain. As if pulled by a string, her hand instinctively reached for the door. The air thickened with her indecision. Maybe it was fate, because she couldn't look away from those eyes. Without thinking, she unlocked the deadbolts, a series of sharp, terrifying clicks. She didn't know what scared her more, the sound of the locks or the idea of abandoning the eyes. Meanwhile, she grabbed the thickest utility rope. From there, she slid the bar just enough to crack the door an inch. A beat later, the musky, wild scent of wet fur and fresh blood rushed in, and she forced herself to action. "I'm not opening the door fully," she spoke aloud, the sound shaky, because she needed to set boundaries, even with the unconscious. "I'm just pulling you inside the airlock." She looped the heavy rope around the wolf's neck and shoulder, a terrifying maneuver that required her to expose her hands into the narrow opening. As the wind shifted, the wolf shuddered, and a low, rumbling growl escaped its chest, a sound more of pain than aggression. After that, she closed the door immediately and locked the inner deadbolts, pulling the massive, inert weight into the mudroom. The floor shuddered, and the smell was overwhelming now. Yet, she didn't feel the full-blown panic attack she expected. Instead, a strange, clinical focus took over. Wound assessment. Stop the bleeding. Control the environment. She cleaned the gashes, which seemed unnaturally deep, and her fingers brushed against the creature's shoulder blades. She felt it clear as day, a slight, almost crystalline structure beneath the fur, and it was wrong. It was wrong because it wasn't muscle or bone. It felt like a hidden framework. Soon after, she pulled the fur aside, revealing the terrifying truth: faint, swirling, dark fey runes, a brand that looked like it had been seared into the skin long ago. Not only that, but the wound was healing too fast, knitting before her eyes, which meant this wasn't just a wolf. This was something supernatural. Open loop. What did Rhys hint at? In the span of a breath, the creature began to shake violently, and its body began to shift. The bones groaned, the snout retracted, and the mass melted. Cass fell back, choking on her own scream. Before she could move, the wolf was gone, replaced by a naked man, scarred, beautiful, and utterly unconscious, sprawled on her mudroom floor. What followed was the sound of a small, metallic clink as something fell from his hand onto the wood. It was a single, perfect sliver of metal. More importantly, she noticed the faint, dark fey mark on his ribs, mirroring the runes she had just seen under the fur. That's why she was harboring a fugitive, and her life of isolation was irrevocably over. Chapter 3. Breaching the Barrier. The terror was profound, yet Cass didn't run. She stared at the naked man, at the grotesque shift marks, and then at the small, perfect miniature bird carving his hand had subconsciously produced. A shifter. A sculptor. As the silence roared, Cass knew this was beyond any logical defense. Her panic attack was now a cold, hyper-focused resolve. Instead of fleeing, she forced herself to touch him, to check his pulse, to cover his raw, scarred flesh with a blanket. This was crucial because she was actively overriding her misbelief that physical vulnerability leads to violence. This man was chaos, but he was also a victim. With every heartbeat, she committed to the lie. After that, she destroyed the evidence of her former life, ripping the meticulously detailed botanical nightshade drawing from the easel. She fed it, sheet by sheet, to the wood stove, and the flames swallowed her control. The outside world will find him, but they won't find me. Soon after, Rhys stirred. He was confused, silent, and in agonizing pain. His eyes, now human, met hers, and the intensity of the bond was palpable, like two magnets clicking together in the darkness. "You," he whispered, his voice rough, scraped. He broke off, overwhelmed. Meanwhile, Cass shook her head. "No words," she insisted, her voice flat, because words were still dangerous. "We don't know each other. You don't know my name." That's why she offered him a pencil and paper instead. From there, a different kind of dialogue began. He sketched a complex, haunting knot pattern, a symbol of the Cinder Hand Coven, but also a masterpiece of geometry. She realized that his pain was his art, and his art was his pain. On the other hand, Cass responded by sketching his wounds, and she used her artistic ability, her core strength, to show him she saw his suffering, but also his beauty. She felt it clear as day, a silent promise of sanctuary. Still, Rhys was racked by shame. Deep down, he knew the truth. His artistic genius, the shifter sculptor's curse, was the source of all the chaos that now threatened her. Not only that, but his internal wolf, the feral side, saw his art as a frivolous weakness. Why would she help something so damaged? As the bond pulsed, Cass gently took his hand. "Your pain isn't a weakness," she whispered, her voice low. "It's a language." This was the first hint of the central theme. As if summoned, the terror returned, but this time, from the outside. What followed was a flicker on the security monitor. It was only a second, but Cass saw it, a boot print, unnaturally deep and crisp, just beyond her carefully placed deadfall barrier. The print had been there for hours, which meant someone had been close watching, tracking. To make things worse, the pattern in the boot print was strange, almost woven, hinting at the feline nature of the Cinder Hand Coven. Open loop. Who made the boot print and how long have they been watching? Even so, Cass didn't panic. Instead, the fear channeled into strategic thought. "I know this house better than anyone. It's no longer a prison, it's a trap." Immediately after, she guided Rhys across the threshold into her studio space, the heart of her sanctuary. This was a massive, emotional step because she was giving up the last vestige of her private, controlled world. The space between them burned with possibility, but also with danger. Eventually, Rhys was settled, and Cass began boarding up the external windows, transforming the space into a fortress. Under the weight of his stare, she became the warrior. The tension broke only when she handed him a small, plain piece of driftwood. "Sculpt it," she commanded, her voice firm. "Use your power. I need you strong." With a single glance, she communicated the new reality. They were partners in survival, and the sanctity of the cabin and their burgeoning connection was the only prize worth fighting for. Chapter 4. The Wounded Muse. Rhys lay on the studio floor, covered by Cass's thickest blankets. The space between them burned with the fresh reality of the shift, and the air still held the sharp, wild smell of ozone and pine sap. Cass tried to focus on cleaning the shift residue from the mudroom floor. No matter how hard she tried, she kept staring at the tiny, perfect bird carving Rhys had made, the shifter sculptor genius, which felt impossibly fragile. He's chaos, but he makes beautiful things. With his scent in the air, the human scent now warm, earthy, and male, far softer than the wolf's iron tang, she felt an unnerving sense of rightness. This was crucial because it violated her core rule: unpredictability should trigger panic, not calm. As the silence stretched, Rhys stirred. He tried to sit up, and a sharp groan of pain escaped him. His voice trembled when he finally spoke, raw and simple. "Water," he rasped. Cass brought him water in a heavy clay mug. She watched his hands, noticing how the muscles rippled, the hands of a sculptor, the hands of a warrior. In fact, they looked too capable, too strong to be trusted. "You're a werewolf," Cass stated, her voice flat, not a question. She used this tone because she needed to maintain psychological control over the situation, even if the facts defied physics. Rhys nodded slowly, his eyes heavy with shame. "Omega." He paused, looking around the controlled space of the studio. "You should have left me to die, Cass." When her name left his lips, it sounded rough and necessary. Cass recoiled slightly. "How do you know my name?" she demanded. "Your scent, your mind." He looked away. "When the wolf is close, we know things." He then touched the faint fey mark on his ribs. "They know things too. They found the scent." As the truth unraveled, Cass sat back on her heels. This was a crucial point because the magical rules of this world meant her isolation was truly meaningless. Her physical walls meant nothing against scent and magic. "Who are they?" she asked, her voice hushed. "The Coven." Rhys closed his eyes. What followed was a silence thick with pain. Eventually, he forced the words out, low and bitter. "The Cinder Hand Coven. They hunt shifter sculptors. They want to harness our power. They tortured me because I wouldn't carve their weapons." Deep down, she knew the truth. He was targeted because his gift was vulnerability. And, just like that, everything changed. She wasn't hiding a criminal, she was hiding an artist. Instead of panic, a strange, burning rage bloomed in her chest. "Just like Martin wanted to control my art, they want to control his." As if the forest watched, the emotional connection deepened. Without another word, Cass took the charcoal and a large sheet of paper, pushing them towards Rhys. "Show me. Show me their shapes. Their traps." She didn't know what scared her more, the Coven's power or the way her heart was suddenly fighting for this stranger. Rhys looked at the charcoal. He hesitated because the act of drawing felt like admitting weakness to his inner wolf. Still, he took the charcoal. What followed was a complex series of drawings, dark, angular shapes representing fey-binding charms, and sharp, geometric lines representing the hunter's movements. The drawings were intricate, beautiful, and terrifying. Meanwhile, Cass looked at the drawings, and she realized she could read them like a map. The logical precision of her core strength, strategic intelligence, was adapting to the supernatural chaos. More importantly, she noticed a subtle change in Rhys's eyes as he drew, a tiny flicker of gold, almost imperceptible, like a spark of fire beneath the surface. As the bond pulsed, a sudden, sharp, intense warmth spread through Cass's chest, a heat that had nothing to do with fear. It felt like coming home. As a result, Cass knew the truth. She felt it clear as day. That intense warmth was the mate bond, confirming the chaos had found its perfect match. She now had two dangerous secrets, the Coven and the fated connection that amplified their target. Chapter 5. The Fear of Connection. Rhys flinched away immediately after the gold flash faded. He recoiled from the intense warmth that had pulsed between them, and the shame returned, settling over him like a shroud. "It was nothing," he muttered, sweeping the charcoal drawings into a messy pile. "Just a spasm. You should forget it." But then Cass reached out. She gently touched his shoulder, hovering her hand over the faint fey mark on his skin. "That," she said, her voice firm, "was not nothing." She used this firm voice because she needed him to stop denying the reality of their connection, and she needed him to understand that denial was a path to danger. "You don't understand," Rhys insisted, his eyes dark. "The wolf, my Omega wolf, is ashamed of this sensitivity. Because of that, the art is a burden. It brings the Coven. It brings violence. You saw my shift. You saw the chaos." That's why Cass shared a piece of her own backstory, quietly, simply. "Chaos finds you even when you're still. I know. My ex, Martin, he never hit me unless I tried to leave, but his control was a cage. I hid here because I thought if I eliminated every unpredictable thing, I'd be safe. In the echo of his voice and her own admission, a deeper vulnerability was forged. Without another word, Rhys looked at the charcoal she was holding. He picked up the piece of driftwood she had given him in the previous chapter, and he began to carve. Meanwhile, Cass continued to detail the coven based on his earlier drawings. Are they all shifters? Do they use magic? They are shifters, but they align with dark fae magic, Rhys explained, his voice softer now as he worked. The Cinder Hand Coven believes art is not a gift, but a resource to be consumed. They enslave shifter sculptors to create magically charged weapons for the fae courts. As the truth unraveled, Cass realized the full horror of the antagonist's goal. More importantly, she understood the parallel. The Coven wanted to steal Rhys's life force through his art, just like Martin had tried to steal her identity through his control. Eventually, Rhys looked up from the wood. The piece was becoming a beautifully intricate lock, woven with impossible detail. This, he stated, holding up the carved wood, is a locking mechanism. They use fae tracking magic, so a simple wooden door is nothing. This is the key to defense. Instead of seeing fear in his skill, Cass saw strategic brilliance. Good, she replied, her voice firm. We're going to use your sensitivity against them. We're going to build a better cage. From there, their collaborative defense began. Cass's strategic intelligence married Rhys's shifter-sculptor genius. She directed him to reinforce the door frames using his ability to subtly manipulate the wood and the energy of the bond pulsed, not with desire, but with shared purpose. She didn't know what scared her more, the danger outside or the way she was breaking every rule she had set for herself. Deep down, she knew the truth. She was actively choosing to engage with the chaos. As the sky darkened, Cass went to check her motion sensors, and she noticed something unnerving. The sensors were completely dead. As if the forest watched, a total silence had fallen over the woods. Chapter 6. Commitment to the Lie. The dead sensors were not a malfunction. As if fate demanded it, the failure was too clean, too widespread. A growl rose in her throat, this time, a growl of pure strategic frustration. The Coven knows I rely on technology. They're not using scent now, Cass announced, returning to the studio. They're using fae energy. They disabled my tech. Rhys looked up, the carving knife paused in midair. They are close then. Very close. What followed was a silence charged with raw tension. Maybe it was fate, but their shared fear made the mate bond hum, and Cass felt Rhys's terror and determination as clearly as her own. You must leave, Rhys stated simply, his voice cracking slightly. I can lead them away. My wolf can outrun them, even if my body is weak. I can't let them have you, because you're the only good thing left. With a single glance, Cass understood the depth of his sacrifice. On the other hand, she knew running wouldn't work. The Coven used fae tracking magic. They would find them both eventually. We don't run, Cass replied, her voice low and steady. She walked to the large window, and she pulled the old emergency rifle from its hidden rack, a practical tool from her pre-exile life. She didn't know what scared her more, holding the gun or the idea of abandoning Rhys. As the bond pulsed, she looked back at him. This cabin is my prison. But now it is a fortress. We are partners now, Rhys. We either survive here, together, or we lose everything. She felt it clear as day, the shift in his posture. Rhys saw not a fragile woman, but a warrior. Which meant he had to accept her decision, even if it terrified him. Eventually, he nodded. Without another word, he grabbed a thick piece of lumber. From there, they began the final phase of fortification. Cass drilled, Rhys manipulated the wood, subtly weaving his magical energy into the defense. More importantly, Cass used her strategic intelligence to map out the attack. They will come for the main door first. So, we reinforce the window to make it seem like a weak point. That's why we focus all the defenses there. As if summoned, the light flickered, and the sound of a distant, low horn echoed through the woods. That night had arrived. The Coven was calling their hunters. In that moment, Cass looked at Rhys. Tell me your real name, she urged, needing the final piece of the connection. Not just Rhys. Tell me your full name, because I need to know the man I'm fighting for. Rhys called her, he whispered, his eyes soft, and the sound of his full name, his full vulnerability, was more intimate than any touch. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, Cass made the final commitment. And, just like that, everything changed. She was locked into the conflict, choosing vulnerability and chaos over the safety of isolation. The war was officially beginning at the boundaries of her soul. I'm ready to write Act 3, the new reality, flowing directly from Act 2 where Cass and Rhys committed to fighting the Coven from the fortified cabin. Cass is channeling her anxiety into strategic defense, and Rhys has affirmed his commitment, revealing his full name, Rhys Calder. Chapter 7. The Language of Defense. The cabin air was heavy with the smell of sawdust, old wood, and the lingering, metallic scent of tension. Come morning, the distant horn that had sounded in Act 2 was silent, replaced by a cold, watchful quiet. Rhys and Cass moved through the Blackwood cabin in a strained routine. This was crucial because they were defining their new reality, no longer as caretaker and patient, but as comrades. Rhys was weak, but he used his shifter sculptor genius to refine the door locks, weaving invisible, complex patterns into the wood that would resist magical force. Meanwhile, Cass was meticulous. As the silence stretched, she cataloged their resources: 3 weeks of preserved food, 1 rifle with limited ammunition, and her vast supply of flammable art solvents and turpentine. She used this meticulousness because calculating every variable was the only way to manage her internal panic. If the Coven is Fey-aligned, Cass began, her voice low, how do we know their weaknesses? My locks stop a man, but not magic. Rhys stopped carving, his gaze intense. He felt it clear as day that she needed more than practical defense. She needed to understand his burden. The magic is tied to us, he explained. His voice trembled with shame. The shifter-sculptor curse, it's about the sensitivity. We are creators, but the Coven uses our deepest sense of connection to track us. What followed was the tragic core of his backstory. Deep down, he knew the truth. My pack abandoned me, Cass. Because I kept sculpting. They saw it as soft, Omega weakness. That's why the Coven knew exactly where to find me. I was already broken by my own kind. As the truth unraveled, Cass saw the raw pain in his golden eyes, and the intensity of the mate bond pulsed, resonating with her own trauma. He was rejected because he was sensitive. I isolated myself because I was sensitive. They hate what they can't control, Cass stated, her voice steady. On the other hand, she didn't pity him. She saw their shared wound. We show them that sensitivity is strength. From there, Cass pointed to her easel, which held a fresh, charcoal sketch, no longer nightshade, but a detailed map of the cabin's ventilation system. We fight with control, Rhys. You make the wood impenetrable. I use my knowledge of the structure to predict their moves. I know every squeak, every weak point. This cabin is my brain. With a single glance, Rhys understood her core strength. That's why he nodded, a silent admission of partnership. Even so, his internal wolf still urged him to flee, and the shame over his Omega status kept him distant. Not only that, but Cass noticed a strange, damp scent on the wind filtering through the thick walls, a scent like ozone mixed with burnt metal. A beat later, the rhythmic, low thrum of Fey magic reached her ears, and she knew the Coven was preparing their next move. Which meant their initial test was about to begin. Chapter 8. The Trapper's Test. The low, rhythmic thrumming outside intensified, vibrating the glass in the remaining windows. The air thickened with the magical energy. Immediately after, the Coven launched a psychological attack. Without warning, the forest erupted with chaotic, deafening sounds, screams, breaking glass, and the high, frantic whimpering of a wounded wolf, magnified by Fey power. Cass clapped her hands over her ears, her breath caught in her throat. The noise was designed to break her control, to trigger the panic she fought so hard to contain. She felt it, clear as day, the paralysis of agoraphobia tightening its grip. It's fake, Rhys shouted, his voice rough. He was clutching the windowsill, his golden eyes wide with rage. They're projecting the noise. It's designed to make the Omega run. They know I am weak. More importantly, Cass had to fight her own mind. It sounds like Martin breaking things again, like glass shattering around me. Deep down, she knew the truth. The chaos was manufactured, but the panic was real. Instead of retreating, she channeled the terror into strategy. She used this technique because analyzing the environment always killed the panic. She focused on the vibrations. "The sound is strongest at the north corner," Cass yelled over the noise. "They're using the water runoff channel to amplify the magic." As a result, Cass sprang into action. From there, she grabbed a can of thick, black acrylic paint and rushed to the ventilation duct near the north wall. That's why she was painting the vent cover, to use the material as a dampener. She smothered the metal in thick paint, and the high pitch of the whimpering sound immediately dropped. What followed was an immediate, violent hiss. The black smoke recoiled instantly, and the tendril evaporated with a sound like shattering glass. You used solvent," Rhys stammered, his eyes wide with surprise. "It's simple, but brilliant." More importantly, Cass used the moment for analysis. She realized that they were looking for an expected magical defense, not a mundane, clever counter-strategy. "They think magically," Cass explained, her voice steady. "We think practically. That's why we win. Because of that, your creative mind and my strategic mind work perfectly together." On the other hand, Rhys was struggling to cope with the influx of information and the near miss. He felt it clear as day that his shame was trying to pull him down again. A true warrior would have felt the probe coming. As the bond pulsed, Cass sensed his emotional spiral. She didn't know what scared her more, the probe or Rhys's self-hatred. "Hey," Cass said, gently placing her hand over his heart. "They used magic. We used a chemical compound, and we won. Every victory counts." Eventually, Rhys met her gaze, his gold eyes softening slightly. "Thank you, Cass." Still, the victory was momentary. A beat later, Rhys pointed to a spot on the opposite side of the cabin. "They're moving now. They know we're adapting. They're going for a direct, physical breach." Which meant their initial defenses were about to be tested by force, and Phase 2, the physical trap, had to be ready. Chapter 9, The First Contact. The tension was suffocating. With every heartbeat, Cass stood by the reinforced window, rifle in hand, and Rhys stood by the newly reinforced door, ready to engage the lock. Without warning, the silence broke with a loud, sickening crack from the outer perimeter. Shadows danced between them as a single figure, a coven scout, clad in dark, padded leather, came crashing through the deadfall barrier. "First contact," Rhys murmured. His voice trembled slightly, but the wolf in him was ready. After that, the scout didn't look for the door. Instead, he ran straight toward the weakest-looking window, the one Cass had meticulously under-reinforced to act as a funnel point. "Now!" Cass yelled. As the scout lunged, Cass quickly yanked a rope that triggered a small, subtle trap, a bucket of thick, wet mud and heavy stones Cass had rigged to swing down from the porch overhang. What followed was a jarring, loud thwack. The scout screamed as he was hit, and the force threw him backwards into the clearing. The tension broke with the sound of the scout hitting the ground. As a result, the clearing was silent again. "He's stunned," Rhys breathed, rushing to the spy hole. "He's trying to get up." Meanwhile, Cass was breathing hard, her hands shaking, the rifle barrel slightly lowered. She realized that she had just actively engaged in violence, the very thing she had been running from. "I won," Cass whispered, staring wide-eyed at her hands. "I actually won." She felt it, clear as day, the terrifying exhilaration of victory mixed with the deep-seated trauma of the violent act. That's why she dropped the rifle. Even so, Rhys knew she was about to spiral. He looked at her, his eyes softening from the gold of battle to a tender, concerned amber. "You saved us," Rhys said, his voice low and utterly sincere. He didn't move towards her, because he understood her need for space, but his gaze was intensely protective. "That wasn't chaos, Cass. That was brilliance. That was strategy." He didn't know what scared her more, the sound of the hit or the sound of his praise. With every heartbeat, the mate bond pulled them closer. Against all odds, Cass walked towards Rhys. She reached up, her hand cupping his scarred cheek. She saw the raw vulnerability in his eyes, and she knew that in that moment, he accepted his art, his weakness, and his love for her. Before either could speak, Rhys leaned down, and their lips met in a desperate, fire-forged kiss. It wasn't gentle, it was survival. It was adrenaline, relief, and the deep, hungry recognition of two souls who had finally found sanctuary in each other's chaos. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, the kiss broke. The space between them burned with the affirmation of their commitment. Next, Rhys gently nudged her toward the spy hole. The scout is gone. He'll bring back the main force. Which meant the siege was coming. Their relationship was affirmed, and the battle was about to truly begin. Chapter 10. The Bond's Beacon. The raw, adrenaline-fueled heat of the kiss vanished, leaving Cass and Rhys panting, their lips tingling, but the danger hadn't gone anywhere. As the space between them burned, the siege's reality crashed back in. Rhys was weak. He felt it clear as day. The drain of the magical forces he used to reinforce the wood was immense. On the other hand, the mate bond pulsed, making his recovery faster, and the energy felt like a burning, invasive truth. The wolf hates it, Rhys confessed, his voice low, his breathing uneven. It rejects the bond because it links me to art and to you. It sees vulnerability. More importantly, Cass knew this was the true internal complication. She felt it clear as day that his self-hatred was a bigger threat than the coven outside. That's why she insisted he rest, but he refused. The more power I draw from the bond, the brighter the coven's trackers burn, Rhys explained, his golden eyes filled with pain. It's a price you pay for choosing an Omega. Instead of arguing, Cass began preparing her strongest external traps. From there, she mixed her paint solvents, highly flammable liquids, into old glass jars, carefully placing them near the fortified windows. She used this meticulousness because her control was the only thing holding their world together. Meanwhile, Rhys suffered a relapse. Without warning, he staggered, and a low, suppressed snarl escaped his lips. The sudden flare of shame caused his half-healed wounds to reopen, and fresh blood bloomed against the white bandage. Rhys. Cass rushed to his side. Her breath caught as she saw the physical toll his internal war was taking. "It's the curse," he whispered, his body trembling. "The wolf believes my sensitivity is weakness, and it punishes the body for creating art." Deep down, she knew the truth. She couldn't fix his magical curse, but she could fix the visible damage. That's why she forced him to lie down, gently stitching the reopened wound. As the bond pulsed, she worked quickly and steadily. What followed was a silence punctuated only by the soft thrum of the needle and the rapid, uneven rhythm of their hearts. But then, a new sound began outside, a high, unsettling, whining noise, like a razor blade being slowly dragged across glass. "They're coming back with fate tools," Rhys warned, his eyes dark. This sound, it slices through wood and bone, which meant their initial defenses were about to be put to the ultimate test. A beat later, Cass realized her oil paint blinders wouldn't stop a physical cut. Chapter 11. The Ultimate Vulnerability, Midpoint Shift. The high, whining sound outside grew deafening. As the wind shifted, the pressure against the cabin walls intensified, like a giant hand pressing down on the roof. Immediately after, a crack appeared in the thick wood of the front door, and a thin, luminous blue energy sliced through the reinforced lumber. It was pure, focused fey magic, slicing through Rhys's subtle warding. "They're cutting us out," Cass shouted over the whine, her voice trembling. She felt it clear as day that her defense was failing. The tension broke with a loud shriek as the cut deepened. Rhys struggled to rise, his body weak, but his gold eyes blazed with a desperate, protective rage. He realized that the coven was cutting the door nearest his last sculpture, the ultimate symbol of his shame. "The sculpture!" Rhys cried out. "It's the key to the trap, but they know it's there. They're targeting my weakness." Without warning, the Fey-enhanced cutting tool sliced through the inner deadbolt. And all at once, everything changed. The door splintered, and the lead coven lieutenant stepped into the mudroom. He was a large, hard man, clad in black, his hand glowing faintly with blue Fey light. "He is mine," the lieutenant sneered, looking past Cass straight at Rhys. "The shifter sculptor will serve." Instead of shielding Rhys, Cass ran to the studio. She grabbed her rifle, her most limited, vulnerable resource. That's why she didn't hesitate. She took aim and fired 2 quick, calculated shots at the lieutenant's protective fey light source, his glowing hand. Crack! Crack! What followed was a shout of pain and surprise. The lieutenant stumbled back and the blue light vanished. More importantly, Cass had exposed her final secret, the fact that she was armed. The space between them burned with the sheer intensity of the confrontation. Cass had successfully defended Rhys's weakness, his art/life, by sacrificing her safety, her concealed weapons/ammunition. This was the midpoint shift. Deep down, she knew the truth. She had committed to a lethal war. As a result, the lieutenant, enraged, retreated instantly, dragging his wounded hand, but he left something behind, which meant the stakes were now higher than life or death. They were personal. Chapter 12: The Price of Connection. The lieutenant was gone, but the heavy, destructive smell of ozone and gunpowder hung in the air. Cass's chest ached with the fading adrenaline. After that, Cass cautiously approached the shattered doorway. She saw the evidence. The lieutenant hadn't just retreated. He had left a clear message. Scrawled in Rhys's blood on the ruined wooden planks were 2 simple words. "Hello, Cass." Her world tilted. She felt it clear as day. The intimate knowledge of her name meant they weren't just tracking a powerful shifter, they were tracking her. "They know," Cass whispered, her voice breaking. "They know I'm the key. They know my name." She realized that her deepest, most guarded secret, her identity, had been breached. That's why the sudden, icy panic returned, 10 times worse than before. How did they know? Was it Martin? Did he send them? Open loop. What is the direct link between Martin and the Coven? In the stillness that followed, Rhys gently pulled her into his arms, and the mate bond flared, this time offering a fierce, stabilizing warmth. "They used Fey tracking magic on your scent when you left the perimeter," Rhys explained, his cheek resting against her hair. "They learned your name from the bond's energy. It's the price of our connection, love." Yet, he looked at the rifle she dropped, and he saw her incredible, selfless courage. He felt it, clear as day, the strength in her commitment. "You used your most precious resource for my shame," Rhys murmured, his voice husky with love and disbelief. "You risked everything to save my ability to sculpt. You are the strongest thing I have ever known." Without another word, Cass looked at the damaged door. As if fate demanded it, her fear transformed into cold, strategic resolve. The Coven wanted to target her fear, but she would use it to build the ultimate trap. From there, Cass grabbed her map. She began drawing the final, most dangerous phase of the trap, utilizing the chimney structure and the flammable solvents. She used this strategy because they had already learned that her greatest strength was turning the familiar elements of her home against the enemy. As the bond pulsed, Cass made the final decision. She felt it clear as day that she would destroy her sanctuary to save her soul. Which meant the stakes were now total. Survival meant the total sacrifice of her controlled life. "I'm ready to write Act 5, the point of no return," flowing directly from the end of Act 4 where the Coven lieutenant retreated, leaving the threat, "Hello, Cass," and Cass resolved to use the cabin as a sacrificial trap. Chapter 13: The Final Blueprints. After that, the message scrawled on the shattered doorway, "Hello, Cass," felt like a physical wound. Cass's chest ached, but the pain fueled her resolve. Rhys watched her, his gold eyes wide with concern. He felt it, clear as day, that the Coven's threat was working because her terror was returning. "We stick to the plan," Cass stated, her voice razor-sharp. She wasn't fighting the panic, she was using it. That's why she unrolled her largest sheet of blank canvas, no art on it, just lines for destruction. "The chimney," Cass explained, pointing to the sketch. "It's the heart of the house, but it's structurally separate. We compromise the load-bearing beams around it. We turn the collapse into a trap." Rhys gasped. He realized that she wasn't talking about a simple explosion. She was planning to implode her entire sanctuary. "You want to destroy your home?" Rhys murmured, his voice husky. "The only place you felt safe? You don't have to do this, Cass." On the other hand, Cass knew she did. She used this firm language because saving him was the only thing that would save her soul. "This isn't a home, Rhys. It's a cage I built from fear." We burned the cage down. What followed was the most intense collaboration yet. From there, Cass directed, meticulously sketching the weight distribution points, and Rhys used his shifter sculptor genius to subtly chip, weaken, and re-weld the main support beams, forcing the structure to hold until a precise trigger. Even so, Rhys was distraught. He felt it, clear as day, that he was helping her destroy her safety because of him. Deep down, he knew the truth. He was the chaos she couldn't escape. Without another word, Cass looked at his scarred hands, which were trembling from the strain of the magic. "You're carving the future, Rhys," she whispered, her gaze intense. "You're not destroying the past." As the bond pulsed, he found the strength to continue. As if fate demanded it, their love was literally breaking the walls around them. Meanwhile, the Coven continued their psychological warfare. A beat later, a low, mocking voice echoed through the woods, magnified by fey magic, shouting Cass's full name, Cassandra Hayes. "We know your history. We know your weakness." Not only that, but the voice also started detailing her private trauma. "Your Martin wants you back. He says you like being controlled. Why fight the inevitable, Cassandra?" Open loop. This is the first time the Coven links back to Martin's name, intensifying the personal stakes. That's why Cass ran to the window. She felt it clear as day that they were trying to trigger the panic, but she grabbed the largest container of turpentine she had. That night, she spent hours rigging the final, crucial defense, the flammable solvents. She used this strategy because she knew fire and chaos would be the ultimate distraction for the Fey-aligned shifters, which meant the trap was set, and the point of no return was upon them. Chapter 14. The Snare and the Fury. The morning broke, silent and humid, but the psychological pressure was crushing. The air thickened with anticipation. Suddenly, the attack began. Without warning, the main door, already weakened, was smashed inward by a powerful, unshielded physical force. Two Coven hunters burst through the mudroom. "They're going straight for the human." Rhys roared, his eyes blazing gold, and he tried desperately to shift, but the transformation locked up. The tension broke with a cry of frustrated rage. His wolf pressed forward, yet his human mind, fueled by the shifter sculptor's shame, rejected the chaos, paralyzing the shift. Rhys was stuck, half man, half shifter, horribly vulnerable. Immediately after, Cass launched Phase 1. She didn't know what scared her more, the two powerful shifters inside or Rhys's paralyzed rage. That's why she threw one of the flammable jars of solvent directly at the hunter's feet. Smash! What followed was a dizzying cloud of noxious fumes and slick, oily liquid. The hunters screamed, momentarily blinded, and their boots slipped on the floor. From there, Cass grabbed her rifle. She used this to enforce the barricade, firing a precise shot high above the hunters' heads to drive them back towards the doorway. The strategy worked, but it bought them mere seconds. Meanwhile, one hunter, seeing Rhys stuck in his agonized half-shift, lunged. The space between them burned with primal fury. The hunter slashed Rhys across the chest with a fey-charged blade. Rhys let out a horrifying, strangled howl of pain. His chest ached. As a result, the hunter retreated, satisfied with the kill. By the time Cass reached Rhys, he was bleeding profusely, the fey magic burning the wound, and his wolf was completely silent, defeated. Deep down, she knew the truth. The hunter's attack had neutralized the mate bond's healing effect. The pain was too much. "They took my strength," Rhys gasped, his voice barely a whisper. "They made me weak." More importantly, Cass saw the consequence of their commitment. They had succeeded in trapping the enemy outside, but Rhys was gravely wounded, paralyzed by his internal conflict. She felt it clear as day that she had failed to protect his spirit, which meant the stakes were now critical. Cass had to fight the final round alone, and she had to fight to save Rhys's soul, not just his life. Chapter 15. The Unmaking of Sanctuary. After that, Cass didn't panic. Her body moved on instinct. She applied a powerful coagulant to Rhys's wound, and she dragged him into the central studio, concealing him behind a heavy, reinforced easel. Suddenly, the coven leader, the one who spoke Fae-amplified mockery, appeared at the shattered doorway unharmed. He felt it, clear as day, that the inner defense had been broken. "Clever girl, Cassandra," the leader sneered, his voice oily and mocking. "You sacrificed the soldier for the artist. Such human weakness." Without another word, the leader raised his hand, and the walls of the mudroom began to groan. He was using Fae magic to dismantle the structure itself. "I know you hate this little house," the leader continued, mocking. "So, I will do you a favor. I will tear down the walls of your prison, and then I will take the boy who rejected his power." In that moment, Cass knew this was the critical juncture. She had to face the antagonist, but she couldn't let him see Rhys. As if fate demanded it, Cass stepped out from behind the easel, rifle dropped, her hands empty. She used this gesture because she was trading physical threat for strategic intelligence. "The house is already compromised," Cass said, her voice steady and icy. "You pull the wrong beam, and the whole thing falls on your head. You haven't broken the structure, you've triggered my trap." That's why she pointed to the chimney area, the precise weak spot she and Rhys had prepared. She used this to bluff the leader. With a single glance, the leader hesitated. He felt it, clear as day, the genuine threat in her eyes. More importantly, he realized she was fighting for Rhys's life while talking about the structure. "You are nothing but a fragile human," the leader snarled, enraged by her defiance. "Your pathetic love means nothing." "It means everything," Cass replied, her gaze fierce. As the bond pulsed, faintly now, from Rhys's wounded body, she channeled all her love into that one strategic point. Which meant she had pushed the antagonist back, but Rhys was almost defeated, and the final trap was the only thing left. She was now standing completely alone at the point of no return. Chapter 16. The Trap Backfires. The coven leader stood at the broken doorway, sneering at Cass's structural bluff. He felt it clear as day that she was lying, but he didn't need a trap to win. "You are a predictable creature, Cassandra," the leader drawled, his voice oily and smug. "You always fight with what you know. But I fight with what you fear." Without warning, he aimed his glowing hand directly at Rhys's hiding place behind the easel. He knew the truth: the human wouldn't sacrifice her position unless the prize was worth it. Immediately after, a specialized binding spell, a network of cold, shimmering blue light, shot across the studio floor, bypassing Cass and wrapping tightly around Rhys's wounded body. "No!" Cass screamed, her voice cracking. Her world tilted. She felt it, clear as day, that raw, psychic connection being wrenched away from her. What followed was the sound of chains snapping shut. The leader had used Fae magic to materialize shackles of Fae iron around Rhys's wrists and ankles, which meant Rhys was completely neutralized. As a result, Rhys, critically wounded and paralyzed by his internal shame, offered no resistance. His golden eyes, dulled with defeat, met Cass's. He looked utterly, heartbreakingly resigned. The pain was too much. The capture triggered Cass's deepest fear, the overwhelming realization that she couldn't control the ultimate outcome. She felt it, clear as day, the failure of her strategy. On the other hand, the leader simply laughed. He used this cruel sound because he enjoyed breaking the fragile human spirit. "Your brilliant trap is meaningless, little strategist," the leader sneered. "Your Omega is weak because his wolf chooses shame over power. Now he is ours." From there, two other coven hunters stepped over the ruined doorframe. They grabbed Rhys's inert body, and they dragged him back out into the woods. Even so, the leader remained, savoring the final psychological blow. The space between them burned with fury and absolute despair. Cass had lost. Chapter 17. The Loss of the Muse. Cass stood frozen in the wrecked studio, watching the hunters haul Rhys's body toward the shattered doorway. His scent in the air fading, mingled now with the rank metallic smell of Fae iron, was the only evidence he had ever been there. As the echo faded, the coven leader took a slow, deliberate step towards her. He felt it, clear as day, that his job was not done until the human was psychologically broken. "Do you know why this happened, Cassandra?" the leader asked, his voice now quiet and venomous. You lost because you chose love. You chose vulnerability. He didn't know what scared her more, his words or the look of dull resignation on Rhys's face as he was hauled away. Deep down, she knew the truth. The leader was echoing her own core misbelief. Meanwhile, the leader continued his psychological attack, leaning in close. Your fear of chaos was right. Your isolation was correct. You brought violence back to your own doorstep. And now, the sensitive artist you chose will be used to fuel our weapons. Not only that, but he delivered the final, calculated blow. We tracked your lingering trauma. Your ex, Martin, his small-minded control was the perfect conduit for our fey-tracking magic. We just magnified the trauma you left behind. As the truth unraveled, Cass stared at the man, utter despair engulfing her. She felt it clear as day that her isolation had been meaningless, because the source of her pain had actively guided the new violence to her door. Yet, she had to endure. Without warning, the leader waved his hand, and a surge of raw, physical fey power slammed Cass against the cold stone of the hearth. The pain was too much. She fell, gasping, and the world spun into darkness. When her name left his lips, the name of the man who had destroyed her life, Martin, it was uttered by the coven leader. Goodbye, Cassandra. Give my regards to Martin, your teacher. As the sky darkened, Cass understood the full scope of the betrayal. The coven knew Martin. They had been watching her since before Rhys arrived, which meant her 2 years of isolation had been utterly meaningless. Chapter 18. The Dark Night of the Soul. The tension broke with a heavy, final thud as the coven leader disappeared into the woods. Cass's chest ached as she lay on the cold studio floor, surrounded by debris, shattered glass, and the drying blood of the man she loved. A growl rose in her throat, a choked, defeated sound. This was the all-is-lost moment. Rhys was gone, her body was bruised, and her sanctuary was ruined. She didn't know what scared her more, the physical pain or the deep, chilling realization that her internal flaw was validated by the plot. Control is safety, vulnerability is violence. She had been vulnerable, and the violence had returned, multiplied. Still, she managed to crawl forward, dragging her exhausted body through the wreckage. She felt it clear as day, the cold, desolate emptiness where the mate bond used to pulse. Eventually, she reached the back of the studio, the area Rhys had subtly reinforced, the hidden root cellar hatch. The sight of it brought no comfort. It was their escape route, but there was nothing left to escape for. Deep down, she knew the truth. She had built her whole life around the false hope of safety. She had feared the world so much that she forgot how to fight for the good things in it. She had chosen to wait for chaos, not to create change. As her soul answered the quiet devastation, Cass curled into a fetal position next to the cold, splintered wood of the chimney trap. She looked at her hands, the strategic hands that failed. In the quiet that followed, she realized the depth of her shame was now equal to Rhys's. I lost him because I was too afraid to truly go outside and fight. What followed was the absolute, quiet resignation of the dark night of the soul. The space between them burned with the memory of their kiss, a memory now tainted by failure. She had nothing left, which meant the final push would have to be rooted in something deeper than fear. It would have to be rooted in love and pure, unadulterated resolve. Chapter 19. The Fragment of Hope. The silence that followed the coven's departure was thick with ash and failure. Cass lay still, the cold stone of the hearth against her cheek, utterly defeated. As the silence roared, she felt the vast, desolate emptiness where Rhys's warmth and the mate bond used to be. I lost him because I was too afraid to fight outside. But then, her fingers brushed against something small and smooth. It was a fragment of the driftwood Rhys had been carving in Act 5, a piece he'd imbued with his failing shifter-sculptor genius. It was beautifully detailed, and the smoothness felt like a tiny, solid piece of his spirit. With a single glance, Cass realized the true meaning of the Coven's victory. They hadn't just taken Rhys, they had taken his ability to create. Immediately after, her strategic mind, her core strength, snapped back into focus. She felt it clear as day that she couldn't accept the ending the Coven wrote. That's why she pushed herself up, pain disregarded, and scanned the wreckage. They didn't finish the job, Cass whispered, noticing the cracked central load-bearing beam, their original trap. She realized that the coven leader had left the structure unstable, but still standing. "They will return," she murmured, a cruel certainty in her voice. She used the certainty because she knew the nature of their control. They would return to finish the destruction and eliminate the problem, the ruined cabin. From there, she found her resolve. She didn't know what scared her more, the coven's victory or the thought of Rhys, defeated, forced to carve their ugly weapons. She would fight for the meaning of creation. On the other hand, she didn't just want to defend. She needed to lure them back to finish the job on her terms. That's why she found her last piece of art paper, a blank canvas. What followed was the transformation of despair into cold, strategic focus. As her soul answered, she began sketching. Instead of a structural map, she drew the coven's retreating path, analyzing the patterns of the broken branches, the scuff marks of the fey iron chains, and the angle of the leader's retreat. Which meant her final move would have to be the riskiest, most visible, and most brilliantly deceptive trap yet. She would use her love as the bait. Chapter 20. The Artist's Arsenal. Cass's strategic mind worked like a machine, coldly calculating odds. She used this intense focus because it silenced the crushing despair of losing Rhys. After that, she formulated the final plan. It was audacious. She wouldn't track the coven. She would make the coven track her, back to the cabin. "They think I'm broken," Cass reasoned, staring at the chimney's ruined base. "They think I'm paralyzed by the trauma. That's why they won't expect me to rearm the trap." Immediately after, she located the remaining, powerful art materials, a bag of highly flammable potassium permanganate, a pigment, and some reactive solvents. She used these chemicals because they created an intense, uncontrollable chaotic reaction, the very thing the coven feared. Meanwhile, she addressed the major problem. The leader knew she was armed. So, she had to make him think she was sacrificing the only human resource she had left. From there, Cass found her rifle, her final, limited weapon. Without another word, she carefully disassembled it, hiding the non-essential parts, and she coated the remaining bullets in a mixture of her toxic pigments. She didn't know what scared her more, the thought of using those toxic materials or the thought of Rhys carving weapons for the coven. She felt it clear as day that she was choosing life, even if it meant violence. What followed was a precise setup. She felt it clear as day that she would use Rhys's abandoned clothing and the smell of his fading blood as the lure, baiting the hunters with the scent of their prize. Eventually, Cass had only one task left, setting the final trigger. She realized that she had to step fully outside the wrecked cabin to place the reactive pigment near the main road, the road she hadn't touched in 2 years. That's why the panic returned, sharp and debilitating. As if the world narrowed to the terrifying space beyond the broken door, she struggled for breath. "Rhys," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I need your strength." As the bond pulsed a faint, desperate echo in her heart, she found the resolve. She was fighting for the light, even in the darkness. Which meant the time for resignation was over. The time for the final confrontation was now. Chapter 21. The Journey Back to Chaos. The space was terrifyingly open. Cass was shaking violently, but she forced herself to stand upright in the shattered doorway. After that, she began the final, crucial descent. She felt it clear as day that every step was a confrontation with Martin, with the past, and with the violence that had locked her away. On the other hand, she didn't collapse. She used this focus because her mind was intensely focused on the strategy, the path, the placement, the trigger. She had turned her agoraphobia into a defensive ritual. Immediately after, she carefully placed the reactive pigments and a single, obvious piece of Rhys's shirt, soaked in his drying blood, exactly halfway between the cabin and the dense forest line. This was crucial because it forced the hunters to follow the scent directly back to the structure. What followed was the site of her final defiance. The ruined cabin, smelling of smoke and solvents, was no longer a sanctuary. It was a volatile bomb. Yet, she didn't run back to hide. Instead, she stood in the open air, embracing the chaos. She felt it clear as day that the coven would return before nightfall. Suddenly, Cass heard a low, subtle thrum, the sound of the coven's return, closer than expected. A beat later, shadows danced between them at the edge of the clearing. Without warning, the enemy was here. She looked at the dense tree line, her eyes filled with cold, strategic fire. That's why she walked slowly, deliberately, back inside the wreckage of her former prison. As if fate demanded it, Cass stood ready. She didn't have a rifle, but she had her mind, her traps, and the memory of Rhys's love. The final confrontation was imminent, which meant the game was no longer about escape, it was about redemption and creation. I'm ready to write Act 8, the resolution, delivering the climax where the structure is finally destroyed, Rhys is freed, and the path to the new equilibrium is established. This act flows directly from Cass, setting the final trap and returning inside the ruined cabin. Chapter 22: The Fall of the Sanctuary. The coven hunters hit the clearing like a wave, drawn by the scent of Rhys's blood and the visible lure. A growl rose in her throat, a silent, protective challenge. Cass waited, hidden in the shadows near the weakened chimney. The coven leader entered first, his face contorted in a sneer. He felt it clear as day that the structure was unstable. But then he spotted Rhys, lying defeated and chained just inside the studio. Such pathetic bait, the leader spat, advancing to retrieve the prize. Without warning, Cass detonated the trap. She didn't use fire, she used physics. She had coated the central load-bearing beam with a final layer of potent, corrosive solvent, and the slight weight shift of the leader's entry was the trigger. What followed was a deafening, horrifying implosion. The central chimney support gave way, and the entire structure, her prison, her sanctuary, collapsed inward with a catastrophic roar. As the world tilted, Cass rolled, protecting her head, and the smoke and dust immediately blinded the hunters. In that moment, her strategic intelligence was rewarded. Immediately after, Cass clawed her way through the falling debris, targeting Rhys. She felt it clear as day that he was alive, but still bound. Rhys. Now, she screamed, her voice rough. She used a heavy, jagged piece of wreckage to smash the fey iron chains, and the iron snapped under the force. Suddenly, Rhys saw her, battered, bloody, and standing in the wreck of her life, fighting for his. He saw the ultimate sacrifice of her control. And all at once, everything changed. Rhys's shame, the fear that his art was weakness, shattered. The space between them burned with primal rage, and the mate bond flared, incandescent and furious. His wolf pressed forward, now fully integrated with his shifter-sculptor genius. He felt it clear as day that his sensitivity was his true strength. What followed was the transformation. The pain was immense, but the shift was instantaneous, total, and terrifyingly powerful. Rhys was not just a wolf. He was a shifter-sculptor of absolute fury. His black fur rippled, and a low, metallic growl tore from his chest. As a result, the ground around him began to move. Rhys's rage subtly manipulated the fallen wood and stone, and the wreckage itself became an extension of his power. He didn't just fight the leader, he used the debris to pin him. The final showdown was swift and brutal. Rhys, his movements a blur of controlled aggression, used a splintered beam, guided by his art, to strike the leader down. That's why the coven leader was defeated, crushed under the remnants of the fallen roof beam that Cass had engineered to fall just so. The climax was resolved. Cass had overcome her agoraphobia by embracing chaos, and Rhys had accepted his unique, artistic power. Chapter 23: The Wreckage and the Relief. The tension broke. Silence descended over the smoking, destroyed perimeter. The air thickened with the smell of wet dirt, burnt wood, and ozone. Immediately after, Rhys, exhausted, shifted back to human form, his body now scarred, but his face serene. He looked at Cass, his eyes a warm, clear gold, no longer ashamed, but accepting. Cass scrambled over the rubble to reach him. She felt it clear as day that the bond was whole again, comforting and strong. What followed was a moment of intense, raw connection. Cass wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his neck, breathing in the scent of pine and wildness. "You stayed," she whispered, her voice rough with tears and exhaustion. "You risked everything," Rhys replied, holding her tightly. "You destroyed your sanctuary to save me. You taught me that art is not a weakness, but the ultimate strength." Meanwhile, they tended to the defeated Coven hunters, ensuring they were bound and immobilized. They realized that the immediate danger was past. On the other hand, the cabin, the physical embodiment of Cass's fear, was gone, which meant their future had to be built on an entirely new foundation: love, vulnerability, and the terrifying, beautiful chaos of the world. Eventually, Rhys looked down at the Fey mark on his chest. He touched it not with shame, but with acceptance. That's why he knew he was ready to face whatever came next, because he had Cass. Chapter 24. 6 months later. Come morning, the sunlight streamed not through camouflage shutters, but through a large, pristine glass window. Cass stands in the bustling downtown square of a small, art-focused city. Her posture is open, no longer physically guarded, and her skin is kissed by the sun. She is opening the door to her new life. She felt it clear as day that the scent of the city air, the sounds of traffic, and the energy of crowds no longer triggered panic. Instead, they fueled her. She has achieved her opposite transformation. After that, Cass flips the sign on the door. It reads, Hayes Fine Art and Sculpture Studio. Inside, Rhys is working. He is shirtless, his scarred back a testament to his past, but his expression is one of pure, focused joy. He is working on a public commission, a large, powerful wood sculpture carved from a storm-felled blackwood tree, fully embracing his shifter sculptor identity. What followed was Rhys setting down his tool. He walked to Cass, his gold eyes warm, clear, and steady. "I have 2 new commissions for the council," Rhys said, his voice deep with contentment. "They love the peace. They love the chaos." On the other hand, Cass laughed, the sound genuine and free. That's why she knew they had won. They had not just survived, they had created. Without another word, Rhys pulled her close. As the bond pulsed, he murmured, "We found our sanctuary, Cass. Not in the walls we built, but in the destruction we survived." The final image is Cass taking a deep, calming breath of the city air, smelling the paint, the wood dust, and Rhys's clean, earthy scent. She smiles, ready for the future she chose. The small piece of driftwood carving Rhys made in Act 2 now sits on the studio counter, perfectly polished. It's no longer just a tiny bird. Rhys has turned it into the central key for the studio's lock. He stops sculpting and smiles at her, his eyes flashing a warm, knowing gold, a shared secret in their open new world. Cass leans in, her voice low and loving. "I'm not painting nightshade anymore," she tells him. "I think I'll paint sunlight." As fire bloomed beneath her skin, the final thought settles. My isolation was meant to keep the world out, but it only created the perfect space for him to find me. The end. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to this channel for more Werewolf Shifters romance stories, and also don't forget to hit the like button.